picture this. It is 1983, right? We are in Cupertino, California. We're inside the Apple boardroom. And the tension in this room is it's absolutely suffocating.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall in that room.
Right. Because Steve Jobs is furious. I mean, he is pacing. He's livid. And he's staring down this lone, awkward 20-something named Bill Gates.
Yeah, Gates was just a kid, basically.
Exactly. And Jobs had just figured out that Microsoft was about to release this user-friendly graphic operating system called Windows. And to Jobs, this was just a massive betrayal. He starts screaming, "You're ripping us off. I trusted you, and now you're stealing from us."
Right. And the context here is super crucial because Apple had spent years cultivating this really powerful narrative. They wanted everyone to think that the point-and-click interface, the mouse, the whole Macintosh ecosystem, that it was their own immaculate creation.
The myth of the lone genius.
Exactly. Jobs fully expects an apology, or at least for Gates to just cower under the pressure. But Gates just looks right back at him, doesn't even blink. And he delivers what might be the most devastating, room-silencing punchline in tech history.
Oh, it's so good. He says, well, Steve, I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox, and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already stolen it.
It's just brutal. But Gates knew the actual mechanism of Apple's success, right? Apple didn't just conjure the graphic user interface out of thin air. Jobs had taken a tour of the Xerox PARC's research facility years earlier.
Yeah, he saw their rough prototype.
Great. He took the underlying blueprint, pulled it apart, and systematically improved upon it to make it commercial.
Which perfectly sets up the mission of our deep dive today. We're exploring the hidden art of reverse engineering success. And let's be very clear right up front, the goal here is not to become a cheap copycat or a plagiarist.
No, definitely not.
The goal is to systematically unpack greatness so you can use those hidden blueprints to build your own entirely original work.
And if you are listening to this right now, wondering why you specifically need to develop the skill today, it's because we're living in a winner-take-all economy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, decades ago, if you wanted to be a professional singer, your barrier to entry was geographical. You just had to be the best tenor in your local town.
Sure, you're just competing with the guy down the street.
Exactly. But the moment recorded music and radio hit the mainstream, technology completely erased those local boundaries. Suddenly, an average singer wasn't competing with their neighbors anymore. They were competing globally with Luciano Pavarotti.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a huge shift.
And the exact same dynamic is playing out in almost every industry today. Because of digital technology, you are competing on a global stage. Your local advantage is basically gone. So the only way to survive is to learn how the best in the world operate and adapt insanely fast.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we want to survive in this winner-take-all world, we essentially have to start swiping from our rich neighbors the way Jobs and Gates did.
Right.
But how do we actually see the blueprint of someone else's success? To me, it kind of sounds like being a curious kid dismantling a household appliance. I know a young Jeff Bezos tried to literally dismantle his own crib with a screwdriver.
Which is terrifying for his parents, I'm sure.
Right. Or, Michael Dell famously took apart his Apple II computer on his 16th birthday just to see how the motherboard connected. But is analyzing an abstract concept like a novel or a business model, is that really the same mechanism as taking apart a toaster?
Conceptually, it is exactly the same, but the methodology shifts depending on the medium. Like for writers and artists, one of the oldest methods of dismantling a toaster is called copywork.
Copywork.
Yeah, it's the detective mindset put into physical practice. You don't just read a great book to see what happens. You literally recreate it to feel the mechanics of how it was built.
Wait, like copying it out by hand?
Yes. Stephen King spent his childhood copying comic books panel by panel. And the best-selling thriller author Joe Hill hit a massive case of writer's block early in his career. To break out of it, he spent 2 weeks retyping Elmore Leonard's novels word for word.
But why does retyping someone else's words actually help you write your own? What's the mechanism there?
It basically bypasses your analytical brain and builds muscle memory. When you just read a book, your brain skips over the syntax to absorb the plot. But when you are forced to type it out, your fingers have to process every single comma, every dialogue tag, the exact spacing of the paragraphs.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it forces you to physically absorb the pacing and rhythm of how a master builds suspense.
So you're literally downloading their cadence into your own hands.
Exactly.
You don't even have to retype a book to do this, right? You can extract a blueprint through sheer proximity, like the filmmaker Judd Apatow.
Oh, this is a great example.
Yeah, when he was just 15 years old, he created a fake Long Island high school radio show. The broadcast signal barely even reached the school parking lot, but he used the guise of the show to land interviews with absolute comedy legends.
People like Jerry Seinfeld, right?
Jerry Seinfeld, John Candy. He would get them on the line and just reverse engineer an entire career path. He'd ask, how do you write a joke? How do you get an agent? He extracted the underlying structure of a Hollywood career before he even had a high school diploma.
That is so smart. And you can apply that same detective work to the structural level of a narrative, too. Like, the author Kurt Vonnegut didn't just read stories. He mapped out their emotional arcs on a mathematical graph.
Like an actual graph with an X and Y axis?
Yep. He tracked the protagonists' fortunes over time and proved that almost all great stories follow one of 6 emotional trajectories. Take the Cinderella arc. It's a mathematical trajectory of a rise, a severe fall, and a final spectacular rise.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if it's a fairy tale or a modern blockbuster, the underlying blueprint is identical.
You know, I've seen this exact same concept applied to the culinary world, too. Todd Wilbur built an entire empire by reverse engineering the exact recipes for Mrs. Fields' chocolate chip cookies and McDonald's Big Macs.
Just tinkering in his kitchen.
Yeah, just isolating and testing variables until he cracked the code. But the chef who really formalized this is David Chang with his unified theory of deliciousness.
Chang's approach is amazing because he recognized that true culinary innovation isn't about making everything completely foreign. His theory relies on combining an unfamiliar context with a highly familiar base pattern.
Right, like he created this pork bun dish that totally put his restaurant on the map. And to the average diner, the textures, the specific cuts of meat, it all seemed very new and maybe a little intimidating.
But structurally, it wasn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Structurally, the flavor profile was engineered to mimic a BLT.
That is wild.
It lowers the cognitive barrier for the diner because it secretly triggers this deep, subconscious childhood nostalgia. You think you're experiencing something wildly innovative, but the underlying blueprint is just a classic sandwich.
What's fascinating here is how this methodology totally shatters the myth of innate talent. We're fed this cultural lie that geniuses are just born with magical, inexplicable abilities.
Wait, the lone genius again.
But they aren't. Greatness is about recognizing structural patterns that other people overlook.
But, you know, human intuition only scales so far. It's great for spotting the hidden BLT in a pork bun or mapping the emotional arc of Cinderella. But what happens when the pattern is just too complex for the human brain to process?
That is when you have to start thinking like an algorithm. You have to remove your human bias entirely. Take Tinder's algorithm.
Okay, the dating app.
Right. It doesn't rely on romantic intuition. It relies on relentless data collection. It tracks thousands of swiped profiles, isolates variables like age, photo count, bio length, personality type, and it detects these microscopic similarities between the profiles you engage with and the ones you reject.
So it knows your type better than you do.
Exactly. It predicts your future attraction by finding the mathematical pattern in your past behavior.
I guess if you pull back far enough, everything eventually just looks like data points. Like IBM did this exact same thing with their machine learning program, Chef Watson.
Oh, right, the recipe AI.
Yeah, they fed the AI the entire historical archive of Bon Appetit magazine recipes.
Yeah.
And because the computer doesn't have any cultural bias about what foods, should go together, it discovered that perfect food pairings aren't actually about taste at all.
Really? What are they about?
They're about shared aromatic compounds. The AI looked at the fundamental chemical reality of the ingredients and figured out that chocolate and asparagus make a mathematically perfect pairing.
Wait, chocolate and asparagus? That sounds awful.
I know, but mathematically it works.
Well, to find those hidden variables, whether it's an aromatic compound or a user swiping habit, you really have to create extreme distance from the subject. You have to use the tactic of zooming out.
Zooming out. How does that work in practice?
So in the 1950s, Wellington Mara, who was the team secretary for the New York Giants, started sneaking a Polaroid camera into football games. But he didn't sit on the sidelines with the coaches. He sat all the way up in the highest upper deck.
Okay, way up there.
Because from that vantage point, he could photograph the opposing team's formations right before the snap, stuff the developing photo into a weighted sock, and physically toss it down to the bench.
No way. That's brilliant.
Right. That wide-angle view exposed spatial patterns that were completely invisible to the players on the field.
And we can create our own upper deck vantage point for any project by doing what's called reverse outlining.
Yes.
Instead of creating an outline for something you are planning to make, you take a finished product you admire and break it down into its core quantifiable data points.
Wait, like Sir Ken Robinson's incredibly viral TED Talk.
Yes. If you just sit back and watch it, you think, wow, what a brilliant, engaging academic. But if you reverse outline the actual metrics of the presentation,
The numbers are crazy.
they really are. The talk is exactly 19 minutes long. He tells 40 jokes. That is more than 2 jokes per minute. 35% of the entire talk is dedicated to personal anecdotes, and only a measly 1% is actual statistical data.
So he's not giving a lecture at all.
Exactly. When you quantify it, you realize he didn't win by being a traditional academic. He won by structuring a stand-up comedy routine and disguising it as a lecture.
And this works for corporate strategy too. If you reverse outline Apple's website and compare it to Samsung's, the metrics expose entirely different philosophies.
Oh, I've noticed that. Apple's site is so minimalistic.
Yeah, they use roughly half the total word count. They employ 0 scrolling banners. The text focuses almost exclusively on emotional benefits rather than technical features, and they deliberately mute their color palette.
Just to calm you down.
Precisely. Once you tally those choices, the hidden strategy is obvious. Apple is engineering a digital environment designed to completely eliminate visitor anxiety. Samsung's is busy and technical, while Apple's is structured like a quiet, premium museum.
Okay, but hold on. This is where I get really cautious.
Why is that?
Well, if I reverse outline Sir Ken Robinson's talk, right, and I take his exact blueprint, the 19-minute pacing, the 40 jokes, the heavy anecdote ratio, and I just plug my own topic into that structure, won't people subconsciously realize I'm just playing Mad Libs with someone else's speech? Like, aren't I just a hack at that point?
It's a highly valid fear. And yes, pure copying does make you a hack. You can look at the publishing industry after Twilight became a massive phenomenon.
Oh, all the vampire books.
Right. The market was immediately flooded with endless, completely forgotten copycats churning out teenage vampire romances. They used the blueprint without adding any unique value. However, the catch here is that trying to be 100% original is actually just as dangerous.
Wait, really? Because everything we are taught in business and art is that you have to be completely original to stand out. Are you saying pure originality is a trap?
Absolutely. Researchers at USC studied this extensively, and they identified what they call the novelty paradox.
The novelty paradox.
Yeah. If you survey people, they constantly claim they want highly creative, unprecedented ideas. But in actual practice, when highly novel ideas are pitched in the workplace, they are almost universally rejected.
Why? Because people are scared of change.
It's cognitive friction. Pure novelty makes human beings deeply uncomfortable. We prefer familiar patterns. Worse, the researchers found that the people pitching these original ideas are viewed by their peers as poor leaders.
Wow.
We saw this with the band Radiohead. In the late 90s, they were the biggest rock band on earth. But Tom York, the lead singer, wanted their next album, Kid A, to be completely unprecedented. He actively erased their rock identity, abandoned electric guitars for cold synthesizers, and sang unintelligible lyrics.
And the initial reaction to that was incredibly hostile.
Because it alienated their fans. It was too much novelty all at once. There was no familiar anchor. The solution to the novelty paradox is to engineer what is called optimal newness, or, to quote Don Draper from Mad Men, it's derivative with a twist.
Derivative with a twist. I like that.
You need a proven, recognizable formula to make the audience feel safe, combined with a unique twist to make the experience feel fresh.
So how do we actually engineer that twist? Do we just start randomly mashing things together?
Mashing things together is actually the first and most reliable method.
Yeah.
You combine influences. Quentin Tarantino built a legendary career on this.
Right, taking dialogue-heavy caper structures and forcibly injecting them with 1970s funk music and jarring, stylized violence.
Exactly. Or The Doors. They took traditional Latin drum patterns and overlaid them with a Bach-inspired classical keyboard intro to create Light My Fire.
How does that translate if you're not an artist, though? Like, if you're a politician or an entrepreneur, what's the equivalent of mixing Bach and Latin drums?
That leads to the second method, borrowing from adjacent fields. Early in Barack Obama's political career, his speeches were dry, policy-heavy, and frankly, he kept losing elections.
So what did he change?
To fix this, he didn't study other politicians. He studied the cadence of Chicago preachers. He kept his political platform, but he borrowed their rhythmic pacing and emotional modulation, which completely transformed his delivery.
That is brilliant.
Or look at Steve Case, the founder of AOL. In the 90s, he needed to grow his internet user base rapidly. He didn't study other software companies. He looked at the consumer goods industries, specifically laundry detergent, and borrowed their free sample model.
Oh, all those CDs in the mail.
Yes. He started mailing out millions of free AOL trial CDs, applying a soap-selling strategy to the digital frontier.
A detergent strategy for the internet. That's incredible. There's also this concept of inexperienced experience to find your twist, right? This is the Marvel Studios formula.
Oh yeah, they are masters at this.
They keep their superhero movies feeling fresh by intentionally hiring directors from totally outside the action genre. Like, they hired a guy known for quirky indie comedies and improv to direct Thor. Mechanically, why does that work? It seems incredibly risky to hand a massive blockbuster to an indie director.
It works precisely because the outsider doesn't know the established cliches of the genre. Like, a seasoned action director will try to fix a sagging second act by adding more explosions.
Because that's what they know.
Right. An indie comedy director doesn't have explosions in their native toolbox, so they fix the sagging second act with character-driven humor and vulnerability. The established Marvel structure provides the safety net, and the director's outside perspective provides the twist.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Another brilliant way to find the twist is to elevate the background. You take a component that is normally ignored and force it to be the star.
Right, like Roy Orbison.
Yes, with his hit, Only the Lonely. He took the backing vocalists, who usually fade into the background, and put them front and center right at the very start of the track. And Seinfeld did this with television narrative.
A show about nothing.
Exactly. They took the daily, petty annoyances of life, waiting for a table at the Chinese restaurant, losing your car in a parking garage, and elevated those background moments into the main plot lines. Even Absolute Vodka did this. They took the physical shape of their bottle, which is usually just a functional container, and made it silhouette the entire focus of a decades-long advertising campaign.
And, if you attempt all of those and still can't find your unique angle, you can rely on accidental innovation.
Which is just messing up.
Sort of, yeah. This happens when you try to copy the master blueprint and you simply fail. Amy Winehouse and Mark Ronson accidentally created their defining signature sound because they were trying to perfectly replicate the feel of 1960s Motown music.
Really? That was supposed to be pure Motown.
Yeah, but Ronson couldn't help adding modern hip-hop drum breaks, and Winehouse's lyrics were far too dark and cynical for a traditional Motown song. They failed to copy their heroes perfectly, and the gap between their attempt and the original blueprint became their genius.
Wow. If you're listening right now and feeling stuck, it's pretty empowering to realize that your unique value might literally just be the specific way you are failing to perfectly copy your heroes.
It really is.
But that actually brings us to the most painful part of this whole journey. You have your reverse engineered formula. You've engineered your unique twist. You sit down to physically create the thing, and the result is absolutely terrible.
Oh, the worst feeling.
It's heartbreaking. You look at your own work and you know it's garbage. Why does that happen?
Ira Glass coined a brilliant term for this, the visionability gap. When you first get into any creative or professional pursuit, you do it because you have what he calls killer taste. But that exact same killer taste is what allows you to clearly recognize that your own initial work falls incredibly short of the standard.
Right, because your critical taste, the thing that allows you to recognize greatness, develops years before your technical ability. You can hear that the song you wrote sounds flat or that your business pitch is clunky, but your hands and your mouth literally do not have the muscle memory to execute it properly yet.
Exactly. The novelist Anne Patchett describes this sensation perfectly. She says having an idea in your head is like this beautiful soaring butterfly, but the moment you actually force it into physical existence on the page, the translation from brain to reality is so jarring it looks like you ran the butterfly over with a car.
R.I.P. to the butterfly. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we get from a mangled first attempt to actual greatness?
Through the scoreboard principle, measurement begets improvement. If you want to master the execution of your twist, you have to track your metrics relentlessly. Take George Leonidas Leslie.
Who's that?
In the 1870s, he was known as the king of heists. He successfully stole an estimated $12 million.
Whoa!
Yeah, but he didn't just reverse engineer bank blueprints on paper. To ensure his team could actually execute the plan, he built full-scale architectural replicas of the banks inside empty warehouses.
Like movie sets.
Exactly. He made his gang physically practice the heist in the dark, timing them with stopwatches. He bought vaults directly from the manufacturers just to blindly dismantle them in his living room until his hands memorized the tumblers.
So he closed the visionability gap through obsessive repetition. And you see this exact same dedication to metrics in modern athletics, too. Look at Roger Federer.
Oh, the tennis player.
Yeah, at age 35, he suffered a severe knee injury, and the consensus was that his career was over. But he used data analytics to systematically review his game and realized that his backhand slice was losing him roughly 10 points a match against top rivals like Nadal.
Just that one specific move.
Just that one move. So he created a specific metric to track that one vulnerability. He adjusted his technique, started hitting the ball earlier and flatter, tracked the success rate, and came back to win the Australian Open.
And it's the same mechanism in corporate culture. The Ritz-Carlton hotel chain tracks their net promoter score obsessively. But the way they actually move that metric is by training employees to systematically address what they call unexpressed needs.
Unexpressed needs. What does that mean?
Like if a guest asks a lifeguard, "Have you seen my lost goggles?" The employee doesn't just say no. They are trained to offer to buy them a new pair. If a guest is running late for a flight, the bellhop doesn't just wait with the cart they jump in and help pack the messy bags. By strictly tracking the metric, it drives a daily culture of hyper-anticipation.
But, tracking every single interaction sounds completely exhausting. If I start measuring every little thing in my work, aren't I just becoming a robot? What happens when you pick the wrong metric to obsess over?
This raises a critical warning. Psychologists refer to this danger as surrogation. That is when the metric you are tracking actually replaces the underlying goal itself.
So the number becomes the only thing that matters.
Exactly. You forget why you were tracking the number and you just optimize for the number. And the reason humans fall victim to this is psychological. Abstract goals, like building long-term customer trust, are cognitively exhausting to evaluate. A hard number requires significantly less cognitive load to process. We swap the complex reality for a simple metric to save mental energy. The most devastating modern example of this is the Wells Fargo scandal.
Oh, that was a complete corporate meltdown.
It was a tragedy of metrics. Leadership wanted to increase overall profitability and customer loyalty, so they created a single, easy-to-measure vanity metric products per customer. They pushed the slogan, "Going for Gaunt," demanding employees sell 8 distinct financial products to every single person.
8 products. That's insane.
The pressure to hit that specific number became so intense that employees were literally drinking hand sanitizer at their desks to cope with the stress.
Hand sanitizer. Just from the stress of hitting a quota.
Yes, because the metric replaced their actual job of helping people with their finances. It led to massive systemic fraud, with employees opening fake bank accounts for homeless individuals just to hit the daily quota. The metric entirely destroyed their moral compass.
That is terrifying.
Surrogation blinds you to reality. To prevent it, you must balance your scoreboard. You need leading indicators, which are the daily habits and efforts you can directly control, like how many hours you practice your presentation. And you need lagging indicators, which are the final results you can't control, like your total sales numbers or your win rate. If you only obsess over the lagging indicator, you will drive yourself crazy or compromise your integrity to hit the target.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap this incredible journey. If you want to achieve greatness, don't just sit around waiting for a magical stroke of genius. Be a detective. Steal the underlying blueprints from your rich neighbors. Zoom out to find the algorithm and the data driving their success. Introduce optimal newness by combining influences or elevating the background to find your unique twist. And finally, bridge the gap between your vision and your technical ability by tracking your progress with a healthy, balanced scoreboard. So I want to ask you, listening right now, what stands out to you? Look around your own life, your own career. What is the one familiar formula you interact with every single day that you are going to start reverse engineering tomorrow?
And as you think about how to apply this, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought. We have spent this entire time talking about reverse engineering the best in the world. But if we constantly study the current winners, do we accidentally trap ourselves in today's paradigms? Earlier, we briefly mentioned Tom Petty. He willfully ignored Bruce Springsteen's music entirely to protect his own originality. He didn't want the current standard of greatness to infect his unique sound. So what if the ultimate level of reverse engineering isn't just studying the hits? What if you devoted your time to studying the failures in your industry? If you can systematically analyze the negative space, the things that didn't work for your competitors, the invisible assumptions everyone else is making that lead to a dead end that might just be where your greatest, most disruptive innovation is hiding.
Find the negative space. I love that. So the next time you peek through the window and see your rich neighbor's shiny new TV set, don't just admire the picture. Figure out how to open it up, look at how the wires connect, and then go build something they haven't even dreamed of yet.